Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Last week I shared with you Katie's experience where she explained to me that she'd seen a wolfman around her home and that he was in the garden. I managed to sit down and speak with Katie again this week and we explored some of the earlier experiences, and she updated me on some recent happenings at her home that she wanted to talk over with me. I put Katie in touch with Steve, who was Fred's carer, as he's very close to Katie in distance, and he knows more about the movements of these creatures than anyone I know. We would also like to explore the possibility that perhaps the creature seen by Katie could have been connected to the activity of the creature Fred described when he saw a werewolf that tapped on his window in September of 2023, and that was just a few short months before he passed away. As a quick recap for any newcomers, I should explain that Katie lives in Wantage in Oxfordshire, close to the site of the old RAF Grove Military Defence Base. She also lives very close to Letcombe Brook, which is a rare chalk stream seldom found in the UK. Katie starts work very early in the morning. In the night she saw the wolfman. It was about 8:30 p.m. when Katie returned home from a meeting with friends. As she stepped into the garden through her gate, she immediately sensed she was not alone. She rushed up the path and the steps and went inside and locked up and closed all the window coverings. Katie got ready for bed and nodded off, only to be woken by her cat in the middle of the night, who was acting in a way she'd never seen before. He was growling and hissing and concentrating beyond the cupboard window out into the garden. As Katie put on her patio light, she saw, just outside of its range, what she described as a wolfman, who then shrank back into the darkness. Shortly after, he approached the house and reached for the window with a limb described as something between a paw and a hand. When Katie was a child and her grandmother passed away, she was confronted with an entity that emerged from her childhood bedroom curtains. Katie calls him a demon, and he's come back several times in her life when she's been low or anxious, and he comes to scare her. Since the Wolfman's recent presence, the dark demon has not returned, but the Wolfman has on several occasions. I caught up with Katie a few times via WhatsApp and she kept me updated on anything unusual happening. And I rang her this week and we chatted about further visits from the Wolfman to Katie's home. And we discussed some early events that I feel may be connected in some way to the experiences that are happening now. Next, you will hear me read the transcribed chat between myself and Katie. I asked her if there'd been any further activity at home, and she said, "Since we last spoke, Deb, I feel that the Wolfman has been around my home quite a lot. I can sense him when he's around. I leave for work really early in the morning, and as I go out into the garden, it's usually still dark, and I can sense him there. I feel like I'm being watched, and I get the same eerie feeling that I did the first night he showed up. It's pitch black when I leave, and it's really unnerving. I've had a lot of stress lately with work and the cost of living, and I'm unsure whether this is connected to the Wolfman situation or if it's a coincidence. My gut instinct is that he's not there to harm me or hurt me, and I think he's trying to reassure me that everything will work out as it should. Normally, this would be the time the demon would be around, and I haven't seen him at all. When I think about it, in the moment, it's really quite stressful, as I'm usually thinking, I'm too stressed, I don't have time for this activity as well. And even then, it doesn't feel like he's here to harm me. And to be frank, he's had ample opportunity to do that, and he hasn't. I also haven't had any sleep paralysis event, but there have been some activity around the home, and something is tapping on the windows. The first time this happened, I'd had a really stressful day. To be honest, I was feeling put upon, and I thought that I was shouldering other people's responsibilities, and I wasn't having a great day at all. I got back home, and it felt like my mind was going at a million miles an hour, and I was anxious, and a little bit upset and overwhelmed by it all. It was still early in the evening. I was chatting with some of the ladies in the support group you set up. It was still early, and I heard a tapping on the back door. I didn't question it at first, as I thought it was my partner calling, or the landlord who doesn't live too far away from me. So I got up, went to answer the door, but there was nobody there. I switched on the security light. Nothing. Couldn't see anyone out there. That really puzzled me. The two taps were distinct. Now, my cat's usually pretty energetic at this time in the evening, and he was whizzing all around the place and going a bit scatter. And then I heard tap tap on the bedroom window. So he'd moved from the back door to the side window in my bedroom. But the window in that room had the blinds closed also. The living room curtains were open so that the cat could see outside. And he didn't tap on those windows. I realised the back door curtains were closed, as were the ones in my bedroom, and he had avoided the uncovered windows completely. Now there's gravel outside, and if it was a person at the door, I would have heard them walking on the gravel. I spoke to my partner about it, and he suggested maybe it was birds or, a squirrel, but it didn't sound like that. I would have heard it on the gravel, and the window ledge is, high up off the ground and really narrow. There were 2 taps on the door and 2 taps on the window, and I was meant to hear them. I spoke to Katie about my feelings on these visits and the fact that I don't feel he's there to harm. In fact, the feeling I got was that he wanted Katie to know that he was there. He didn't want to scare her. In fact, he seems to show up when she's stressed, anxious, or upset. Yet his appearance and his very presence was something that all humans would fear, as we have no real understanding of these beings or what they want with us. We had a private conversation about Katie's worries, and once again, he seems to want to help with that situation in some way. I also understand the stress this must be having on Katie. She has all of her own responsibilities, and on top of that, she has her abilities, which can be a whole nightmare of their own. Working out what's your emotion and stress and what you're picking up from others is a hard task. Then, to have the responsibility for this new relationship with what most people would describe as a monster. That's a lot to shoulder, a lot to carry alone. And I'm so grateful to be able to help with this in any way that I can, no matter how small. I want to protect Katie and keep her safe. And with the help of others, show her how it was for us to come forward with our monsters. Just admitting it that it's happening can be the first hurdle. I ran from the responsibility of my gifts for decades because I saw them as shackles rather than a useful tool to help me navigate life and all the things that it throws at you. I could tell that Katie was more settled in our second chat. Her energy had changed. She seemed more at ease with her abilities, but she had a myriad of questions. She did seem more settled. And I think going forward, some of the questions she has will be answered. Serendipity was once again at play, as I asked Katie to take me back to an incident she'd had in her middle teens in the Kielder Forest area, which is in the north east of England. I was working on a report that came to me from a young boy who stayed at the same camp as Katie. Here's his report, and then we'll pick back up with Katie and her experience at Kielder. And this report's called A Neanderthal Saved My Life. This came into me from a chap called Tim, and he said, "Hi Deb, I hope you're well. I contacted you as I've just come across your YouTube channel when I was watching one of your videos where you talk about the wild man that was seen many years ago. I was in Kielder Forest with a youth team and I ran away after an argument that I had. I ran into the forest and away from the log cabins I was staying in. As I was running, I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was there and I saw it. And the only way to describe it is to say it looked like what I would call a Neanderthal type person. He had long hair covering his body everywhere. This honestly happened to me. I was around 12 or 13 at the time. It was in 98, close to 99, and it was happening. And we were staying at Kielder Dam, which is in Northumberland. All the time, I played it down. I told myself it was an old, homeless person, but I am for sure it wasn't. It was something else entirely. I stopped for a split second as it happened. Everything was just so fast. And as I was going to run again, this thing grunted and made me go back in another direction, not the way I'd come. On returning to the area the next morning, I realised I was only a few metres from a cliff edge leading into the dam where he'd stopped me with his growl. He saved my life that day. I did mention this to the guide back at the cabins, and he played it down to just being my imagination. But it wasn't, honestly. I saw a wild man that day. I'm nearly 40, and it's still fresh in my mind as much as it was then. There is something out there for sure. And since then, I've always been intrigued by Bigfoot. But this wasn't a Bigfoot. It was more human in the face, from what I could make out. I was always tall as a kid. I'm 6'3" now. I was tall then. I was definitely taller than it, but it was fatter than me, with bigger arms and legs. It wasn't aggressive at all. I truly believed it helped me that day and stopped me going over that cliff. If you've been to Kildare, it's very remote, and anything could have happened to me out there. I just thought I'd let you know my story. Now, I have several other reports from Kildare Forest. 2 German tourists reported hearing whispering voices and shuffling feet in 2003. Steve Butler, who's a well-known wild camper here in the UK, had an experience in Kildare when he was bivvy camping there one night. He saw orange-coloured eye shine close to his tent after he heard something big thrashing around in the woodland, and in the middle of the night, the tarp was yanked off his tent by an unseen hand. In August 2018, a local man rang the police and reported that he could see some strange lights moving in a triangular fashion behind the clouds. I asked Katie if she'd mind telling me about her experience at Kildare that happened when she was a teen. And she said, when I was younger, I was in the Scouts. And we stayed at Kildare Forest Camp as it was the year the Scout organisation celebrated its 100th year. We were camping in the forest, right on the edge of the lake, and I slept in a hammock. I felt so brave for doing that. I woke up in the middle of the night because I could hear a strange noise. I could hear panting. The panting was like the noise a dog would make, and I could hear the steps moving around the camp, and it was a big animal. You could hear it circling ever closer. And as it got quite close to me, I could smell an awful smell. It was like a mixture of strong fox pee and wet dog, but much, much stronger. I could hear it sniffling around, and I was absolutely terrified. I had nowhere to go, and I just clutched my sleeping bag tightly and just waited for it to leave. This experience stayed with me, and a few years later on another scout camp, a similar thing happened. We were staying in a woodland close to a farm, and the farmer told the scout leader there had been a lot of big panther sightings in the area. The scout leader told us kids what the farmer had said. We just thought he was winding us up just to spook us. We made a bivouac in the woods and we slept there. And one night, one of the lads shook me awake as he could hear something moving around outside. We both listened and we could hear really soft footsteps moving around. The footsteps then paused and we heard a low growl. We clung to each other and just buried our faces in the sleeping bags. In both of the areas that Katie has mentioned, there are multiple cryptid reports, paranormal events, and sightings of lights in the sky or UAPs. There are far too many reports for me to add here, and they spread out across the country. I asked Katie if she would take me back to a more recent event that happened to her and a friend on a dog walk. Katie was out with a friend in an area called the Ridgeway, which is an ancient trackway described as Britain's oldest road. Now, the ancient trackway starts in Avebury, Wiltshire, and it ends in Ivanhoe in Beacon, Buckinghamshire. And it has many ancient sites along its trail. It's a beautiful and mystical place, and many people visit each year. Katie's visit was not eventful until they reached a certain part of that trail. And Katie said, my friend let me know she was taking her dog for a walk on the Ridgeway, and she wanted to know if I wanted to go with her. The weather was a bit iffy, but it was still a good day for a walk, and we went up onto the Ridgeway. We went to a place called Such Chambers Knob, also known as Cook Hamsley Hill, and occasionally Scotchman's Knob or Beacon Hill. as it's an early Iron Age round barrow. Now it's a semicircular bank with a round front, and its appearance may have changed in part due to ancient ransackers based on the belief that it was used to hoard treasure. On a lighter note, some people go there to take a selfie at the knob sign. Our walk was about 4 or 5 miles, and it was a circular direction. We started at the top of the ridge, went down into the valley, to an area where there's an old farmhouse set back in the woods. I think it was abandoned some time ago, as it doesn't look lived in. And as we got to the building, I felt really uneasy. I was literally on the jump, but my friend felt I should shake the feeling and just carry on, so that's what we did. We walked a bit further across the fields and into the woodlands. My friend's dog was after lead, and she's really well behaved, and she has a guarding habit. And when we reached this spot, she was trying to guard us from something we couldn't see. So much so we had to put her back on the lead. And as we were going through the small wood, which is about 150 metres wide, everything went silent. There was no bird or animal sounds, and the atmosphere became really, really eerie. The walk is like a loop, so you come back to the car park a different direction, a different way than when you entered. When we got back to the top of the Ridgeway, things felt better. We let the dog back off the lead. We both looked back down the valley to the area where we felt so spooked. And at that moment, there was the sound of an awful screaming. It was god-awful and unearthly. It sounded like a woman who was being attacked, and she was screaming out for help. But at the same time, it didn't quite sound human. There was something different about it. On hearing this, my friend's dog shot off back to the car as quickly as she could. The start of the walk was fine, and I did feel off as we passed the old farm, but we pushed on ahead. But that scream and the way the dog reacted was horrifying, and we haven't taken that walk since. To be honest, my friend and I took note of the dog's reaction and followed her back to the car as quick as we could. In all of Katie's experiences, she's in a place with very high levels of ancient energy. We know that where the earth cleaves or forms ridgeways, there's a higher amount of earth energy. It's the same for me. I live on the Pennine Fault, and I think that's one of the reasons I have so much activity that I can pick up on around me. It doesn't surprise me there are ancient burial sites in all of the places Katie picks up on activity. I think she can tune in when she's relaxed. As I chatted with Katie, I realised that most of her strange experiences come with a prior warning, a feeling that something's amiss. She feels watched when the Wolfman's around. She can pick up on his energy now. I know Katie's starting to trust this part of herself and get comfortable with it. And most importantly, not to dismiss it when this happens, as society trained us to do. On the start of the walk on the Ridgeway, she felt fine. And then when she entered the valley, everything felt off to her. The dog picked up on it too, just like Katie's cat does, because animals can't be trained into not feeling. They instinctively know when something has changed. When Katie and a friend entered the small woodland, Katie picked up on that silence. There was no sound in the wood until the unearthly scream. Is Katie walking around like an open radio? The more she relaxes, the easier it is to tune that radio in. We don't get to pick the stations or frequency of the broadcast, but we get a sight, a kind of warning before the connection's made. Up to now, all of these experiences have kept her safe and out of harm's way. Katie's friend also heard the scream, although she didn't feel the warning signal that Katie got, which tells me that screaming was real, not imagined or hallucinated. They both picked up on the fact there was something different about it. It felt inhuman. They both noticed the dog was trying to guard them, and we have to ask, from what? The threat was clearly perceived by the dog, hence her reaction during the walk and a speedy getaway. I asked Katie if there were any other experiences she wanted to share with me before we finished chatting, and she explained that there was just one other experience she was having difficulty explaining. On this occasion, she saw a shadow being of some kind. And I've seen this myself. I've seen it often, and he feels as old as time. This is also another experience where Katie was given a warning. Katie said, "This experience happened in my late teens, and I was still in the Scouts, and we were staying in the north of France in Argenton. We did have to move campsites as there was a lot of severe thunderstorms. The camp we were originally staying at was at a high point on top of a mound that had been made to bury 2 tanks from the Second World War that they couldn't transport back after the D-Day landing. So they just mounded dirt on top of it. Not the best place to be camping in a lightning storm. So we moved to another camp that was set on a farm with a track that went up into the forest. And then there was this little tiny abandoned church or chapel set in the woodland with a small graveyard at the side of it. And I felt the need to go and investigate. When we had some free time, I decided to go and see it. We were warned to stay away and stay on the tracks in the forest, as there was still old incendiary devices and live ammunition, and bombs and things like that were on the land buried there. It was really peaceful, a lovely place. I wandered around, visited the graves and the chapel. It was just starting to get dark as we were getting close to sunset. I thought I'd better go back to camp before it got too dark. As I was walking along the path, I got something in my mind that said, "Turn around." I looked back, and in the middle of the path, there was a figure on the track. He looked like a shadow being. He wasn't solid like a shadow. You could see through him, but he was clearly his own entity. And he was just standing in the middle of the track for a few seconds, and then he walked into the graveyard. And as he walked off, he just disappeared. Seeing he wasn't scary, I was fascinated with him. He was there for me to see, and then he walked off and just vanished. Now, I found an old report in my notes sent to me secondhand for one of my listeners, and it's a written text from a girl who's seen a shadow being. She sees them for most of her life. But in 2012, she had a very similar experience to Katie with a shadow being that was seen around an old abandoned house and cemetery. Like Katie, this witness was not scared by what she saw. She was more intrigued and wanted to know more about him. She said, "I often see shadow people, and my latest experience happened when I was walking home along the edge of a field where there's a very large old house that stood there for a long time ago. The house was built in the 1840s and it had fallen into very bad repair. About a year ago, it burned down during a huge thunderstorm. There were several old oak trees right up against it, and they burned too. A friend of mine's now fenced off the property, with several horses in the pasture there. There's an old family graveyard about 100 yards from where the house once stood. No one's been buried in it since 1897. There are 15 graves you can see, but I've been told there are about 40 or more graves there. With permission of the property owner, I've been doing some shooting of video and some paranormal investigations for about 2 years now. Other people have claimed to see a Confederate officer with one arm on the property over the years, but I've never seen him. He's supposedly seen riding a horse, and people have claimed that he has ordered people off the property. Just the other day, I was on the property waiting for the edge of dark when I saw one of the most distinct shadow people I've ever seen. 3 horses were standing between me and where the old house once stood when I caught movement down near the cemetery. I saw a dark black human shape walking away from the cemetery towards the location where the house once stood. I carefully raised my camera and shot 3 quick photos, only to find out later that no shadow person showed up on the camera. The shadow being appeared to be about 6 feet tall. I could tell he was wearing clothes, but no hat. It walked to about where the front door of the old house would have been and just vanished. Talk about the hair standing up on the back of your neck. I was shaking. My adrenaline was pumping. I went and walked the path that it walked, and I even went to the tombstone nearest to where I first saw it. But that stone was so weathered you could no longer see any of what was once written on it. But I know from research that this was one of the earliest graves from before the Civil War. It was one of the most distinct shadow people that I have ever seen. I will be going back and trying to see it again. I think the light may have been too low for the camera and I didn't have the flash on. Next time I'll be prepared. It was one of the most exciting sightings I've ever had, and it makes searching for paranormal activity and ghosts really worth it. I know firsthand that shadow people are real. At one point, when it was walking along, it was about 15 feet from one of the horses in the pasture. And when it passed in front of the horse, and the horse raised its head and looked right at it, I'm sure that horse was as spooked as I was. When it walked in front of the horse raised its head like, I said it would done if someone had walked up to it. I'm sure the horses have seen it before, but it clearly spooked them. I'll keep this updated and I'll go back and I'll let you know if I find out any more. Let me tell you that there are 2 Confederate soldier burials in the old graveyard, but no officer was buried there. I think it might just be a legend. At least there's no record of one of being buried there. The claim's been made for years and by many different people that the Confederate officer is seen with one arm riding a grey horse with black spots and he's seen on the property. But I've never been able to find out who he could have been. It's said that the sleeve of his coat with no arm in it is pinned. Everything sounds right, but who he is or why he's there, I'll never be able to find out. I would imagine that both of the shadow beings that the girls seen were just doing what they did in life. They just retrace the steps they'd taken often. We always associate graveyards with the ghouls of the night, We hurry past their railings and gates quickly. But in the daytime, they are peaceful, calm places. You hear the birds singing, you see the sunlight as it dapples with the shadows. I often sit with my dad, have a coffee and a chat where he's buried. It's a woodland setting, and so many people feel the wildlife there. It's become a haven for them. And for the few wildflowers we see so rarely these days. Sitting by my dad's side as the season changes, as he did when he was alive, visiting our relative, awards me a kind of calmness. A beautiful place to sit. I once went and there was 2 little pigeon eggs that had been laid on his grave, which is strange because my Uncle Jed's there and he kept pigeons his entire life. They were his hobby. Maybe both of these gentlemen were happy there at some time and they returned because they wanted to, even now. Before we finish today, I want to touch on some of the points mentioned by Katie. The first one being the strong smell of urine, often described as fox-like but stronger, or like a wet dog, and the way the dog acted when they were walking along the Ridgeway. The first case that springs to mind is a recent case from Deeside, where a family visiting for the 2nd year in a row to a cottage were confronted by a canine creature that tapped on the window of the cottage. It was around the cottage for several nights, and it could be heard walking on the gravel. On at least 2 occasions, the family woke up to a strong smell of urine, a mixture of fox pee and wet dog that covered the door and the children's sledges that were outside. On a visit to Bernovat, lots of dog walkers were having trouble with their dogs acting out of character, running back to their cars quickly. Could the dog sense what left that scent trail behind? Was it marking its territory? Katie mentioned smelling a strong wet dog smell when she was in Kielder Forest. Not that far away at Thrunton Woods, a man I know well, out with his friend, also described that same wet dog smell. And this is an account of Stu Hill, my right-hand man here at BBR, and he said, I had an experience in Thrunton Forest when I went out there with a friend in June 2015. My friend's from Australia. We travelled to Thrunton so I could show him the caves on the crags. We followed the reg trail in, stayed on it until it splits, and then we joined the trail on the northern side. The trail leads up to the old part of the woods. I had no visual sighting as such, but when we were out there, we were confronted by the most god-awful smell, and something came crashing through the bushes coming in our direction. The smell was truly disgusting, and it appeared on the breeze. It was kind of like body odour mixed with wet dog, but also quite musky, but worse. We were both puzzled. And then we heard the loud sounds and more heavy crashing moving away from us. And that stink faded along with that noise. We came out and carried on up to the crag for the rest of the day, coming back the same way, with no trace of any odour or noise. I'm up at Thrunton Forest a lot, and sometimes you definitely know that something's watching you. In 2021, I received an email from a lady living in the UK now who had grown up in Africa. One day, when she was out with a dog, she was confronted with an awful smell that really spooked her. And she said, I was born in Africa and I left to live in the UK when I was 28. The country I lived in is landlocked and there's a big forestry industry which is used for export and trade. I lived most of my life on various forestry plantations, way out in isolated and remote places where there are very few other people live. The forestry industry plants their pine trees in long blocks, with each tree being on a grid pattern. Since it's pine, nothing grows beneath them, due to the soil becoming acidic. There's no ground cover or brush or any shrub. Like most remote places, the roads are really just dust, without any covering, which means mud and rain and hard, baked earth from the sun. I would take my 3 small terrier dogs walking each day, leaving the house after lunch, and I'd usually be out for just over an hour. I walked the same route each time, up along a dirt road between 2 blocks of almost mature pine trees. And at this point on the route, the road curves around a block of trees and came back to meet the road from the house, forming a loop. It's a breathtaking walk, and there's trees on both sides here. However, the trees fall away on the right of the road, halfway up, and it gives a stunning view of the hills covered in shrubs and brush. I went walking one afternoon as normal, and I heard a growl in the bush, just from, I could hear it from the house. My 3 dogs fled in terror, and whatever it was in that bush chased them. I later found out it was a leopard with a cub, so I waited a week and then went walking again. Thankfully, there were no signs of Mama Cat, and I was careful to avoid her cub zone as I had the dogs with me, and the leopard would have killed him. About halfway into the walk, just as the trees on the right cleared away and the view opened up, I started to smell something. I've never smelt anything like it before. It had a strong ammonia scent like cat urine, but it was shocking how powerful the stench seemed to be out in the open like that. The dogs reacted in a strange way. They ran to me and cowered between my ankles, whimpering. I know a leopard would have spooked them into running home, so I was confused about the smell of the urine making them so frightened. I stood my ground, with the dogs between my legs. You learn early on never to run with wild animals. And I was also armed with a handgun, being female and out on my own. The smell got stronger and stronger, and then it seemed to mix with the smell of wet dog fur. By this time, I was terrified, but I did not know why. All I knew was I felt surrounded by something that was making the hair stand up on my body, yet I couldn't see anything. I wanted to run back the way I'd come, just to get away from whatever was happening there. But I knew if I ran, and it turned out to be a big cat, I would be attacked. So I did something that almost made me mess myself. I went forward and kept moving very slowly, one step at a time along the road, walked into the smell. Have you ever been so frightened that you can hear your blood roaring in your ears? I remember my teeth were literally chattering, and the dogs were milling about between my legs with their tails between their bellies. This was not a good sign. The further along the track I got, the more I looked around me and saw nothing. It's impossible, but there was nothing to see at all. How could I not see anything in a block of trees planted in straight rows with nothing growing beneath them? I could see straight to the other side of the block along the tree row. I noticed an old gnarl tree standing alone in the right side of the road where the beautiful view was. And although the tree had been there as long as I could remember, I stopped to look it over. About 8 feet up the trunk were fresh rips in the bark, but they were so deep they went into the wood below the bark. Each one looked around 15 centimetres long, and they were fresh enough to have liquid sap leaking from them. I thought at that point it was probably a big cat and it had stretched up, the trunk to sharpen its nails. But then it occurred to me that cats pull downwards and these cuts were at an odd angle. There were 2 marks on the left and 3 on the right of the trunk, about 30-degree angles. It looked like a person with long nails had reached up and started to tear the middle of the tree trunk that gouged outwards and down at the same time. And the smell was the strongest by that tree. I kept turning and looking in all directions as I moved forward, and then finally the smell just stopped. I was a long distance from the tree by then, and the dogs were back to running between myself and whatever they were currently examining. Everything was just normal again. I got home safe with all 3 dogs, but I was too frightened to go walking again. I was 24 at the time. I've not had the courage to tell my own family about this. And the only one other person who knows the story is a complete skeptic, and he said it was probably just a wild cat. A lot of strange things have happened in my life, both in Africa and the UK, and most of them are to do with me seeing lights in the sky at night, especially here in the UK. One other thing that happened on the same African tree plantation was that a UFO was seen the same week as the one that landed in Ruwa, where the children at the school spoke to the occupants of an unidentified craft. I am still very confused over that one, as we lost track of time when we were travelling to the fire lookout tower to see if we could see it. When we arrived, the lookout at the tower said it was gone, and we chatted to the other fire towers along the mountain ridge, who were all still watching it as it moved south along the country. At least we got an eyewitness account from the man who saw it, which was really interesting. I just don't know what to think about that smell. It was so strong, it burned my nose enough to make me want a tissue. Do you have any thoughts on what it could have been? Have you heard of something like that smell before? It seems no matter where you are in the world, strange things happen to ordinary people. I have heard that smell before from lots of different countries: Europe, UK, Canada, America. A smell that's disgusting, often described as smelling like old garbage mixed with pee on BO. An awful smell that hangs around the area even when the person who left the smell is no longer there. I don't know what it is. I wasn't there with them that day, but I strongly believe it was a cryptid of some kind, and they mark their territory. And I think sometimes they do that as a warning to other cryptids, and maybe a warning to humans. I don't know. I'll keep you updated with Katie's case, as Steve's going to be visiting each area with her while she shows him the areas where she had her experiences. And I'll be keeping in touch, and she has a network of people around her now. If you're interested in Katie's case or any of the cases that I've covered, now on a Saturday around 9:15 English time, we will be having a live stream which will discuss each week's podcast. So if you're interested in that or just chatting with people who like the same subjects as yourself, pop over to my YouTube channel and subscribe. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me for future episodes. I release content like this every week, and I'm sure I'll cover a topic you enjoy, so don't miss out. Hit that follow or like button. Please check out my YouTube and Patreon memberships for early or exclusive content, and you can find the link to them and my social media and donation sites in one handy link tree below. BBR is not funded, so any donation, no matter how small, is highly appreciated. So I will bid you adieu, and I will be back at the same time, the same day, with more from the BBR Case Files.